Hi everyone. I finally got a chance to complete the installation of my Yausu FTM 300 ham radio, amateur radio here in Canada. It took me a couple weeks to plan it, make sure I had all the right components, and then go through and do the installation. As I started the project, one of the things I was most concerned about was where to mount the head unit. It's pretty big. I considered underneath the driver's seat, underneath the passenger seat. There was some challenges there with heat ducting and physical space. I considered in behind the glove box, up in the footwell, lots of different ideas. And I ultimately settled installing underneath the passenger seat, and I'll show you what I did to install that. These bolts here. Long reach here. Here I've got the seat all flipped up as I'm looking for space underneath it to mount the radio. Some people have placed it directly on top of this hump, which is filthy. Some people have put it just behind it where the outlet flows to the back seat. That's a potential, and that's my next step, is to figure out where I'm going to put that. Okay, I need to figure out some way, now that I've got the radio positioned, to know how to reposition it. So what I'm going to do here is I've put some tape down on the carpet so I can lift the radio up, dismount the radio from the bracket, and then put the bracket back in place and figure out where to drill. Then I've gone into all of the holes on the top of the bracket and put a dot of ink so I know where I can potentially drill. And now I'm going to see if I can lift the carpet and figure out how to drill in those spots, and get some screws through with maybe some fender washers on the backside. Okay, so now I've got this mounted in place, and as I go to slide the radio body in, I realize that the bolts are sticking up about 1/4 of an inch, and that's too high. So I don't have bolts that are exactly the right length, but I do have some fender washers I can stack on the backside to shorten what sticks through here. I guess that's next. I looked at a couple of different options for mounting the antenna. I looked at some that clip on to the side of the hood, also ones that bolt onto the fender and come out between the fender and the hood. That was ultimately what I decided to go with, but I had to order a bracket that came from the US and had to import it, and it was rather complex. Tried to find one locally, but there was none available that I knew was going to fit. This one though worked very well. It bolts onto the fender, peeks out between the fender and the hood, and it's a good, secure, and stainless steel mount. Okay, here I'm going to start to drill a couple of holes to mount the bracket or the antenna. Look at that, that's perfect. As I was planning this, I wanted to make sure that I found a good spot to mount the antenna, and that the length was such that I could still fit into my parking garage. My Jeep has a 2-inch lift, stock 33-inch tires, and as it sits now, it just barely clears the entrance coming in and out of the garage. The standard radio antenna actually hits an overhead beam, so I was very careful on what to pick, and I ended up going with a Comet 27-inch antenna. Okay, I've gotten to the point where I can attach the antenna. I had to determine where I was going to mount cables. One is the antenna cable. I decided to use a pass-through on the firewall. There's a small black plug that if you have a clutch, the clutch rod passes through. I was able to pop that out. And if you go to do the same, I found it easier to go underneath the dash and push it out rather than reach down under the hood to pull it out. Additionally, there's cabling for the wiring, cabling for the microphone, and then for the remote head unit as well. And I was able to find a place to route all of that where it's out of the way. Here you can see I've run the coax cable. I've installed it in the bracket. I've routed it under the foam molding, and then down there's a plug right there. You can see there's a plug that the clutch arm normally fits through. I've drilled a hole in that and I've passed the cable through there. Okay, now it's time to take the antenna cable that I've pulled through a grommet in the firewall and route it across the dash. And then on the far side, I'm going to route it alongside the door and then back underneath the seat. So I can better see up under the dash as I'm doing my wire routing, I've pulled off this panel that sits below the steering wheel. It just presses in with 6 clips, grab from the bottom, gently pull back, and it comes loose. Well, it seems that every project I work on has a bit of a scope creep. So to route my antenna cable from the driver's footwell through to the passenger side, I ended up having to remove most of the switch stack. I'm also planning on drilling a hole up in the dash that will allow for the head unit cable to pass up. So that means I'll be dropping the windshield and drilling a hole on the top of the dash as well. Stay tuned. Let's say you need to drop the windshield. In the Jeep toolkit, there's a couple of tools, and the first one is a socket with the wood wrench. There's 2 little caps that sit here on top of the windshield wipers. Pull the nut off, and then you can just flip the windshield wiper up and slide it right off. Let's keep them oriented so I know which way to go back on. And I've already loosened the other side. Now on the inside, there are 4 screws, one there. Now I've got the same 2 bolts on the passenger side, this one here and one up here. Once you have removed the 4 bolts on the inside, pulled off the windshield wipers, and taken off the front freedom tops, now you should just fold down this one. So while I had the windshield folded down, I removed my RAM base mount that I've got my radio utilities plugged into. I drilled a quick hole through the dash so I could run the power cable up to the head unit that's going to be mounted on the dash. And I've run it down through the dash, hurtling into the glove box, but I'll route it down and back to the radio in a few minutes. Everything that I read suggested running the positive and negative from the head unit directly back to the battery to get the cleanest power signal. Last year I installed the Mopar auxiliary switch kit, power kit, and I noticed that it did in fact run power cleanly right from the battery through just a relay and a fuse to the underhood and underdash. I decided to use the 15 amp circuit, the auxiliary 4 15 amp circuit, and that's where I got power from. And for my ground, underneath the kick panel on the passenger side where these auxiliary wires run to, there's also a couple of clean grounding tabs or grounding studs, and I used one of those to ground the radio unit. It's very similar to the route I went with the auxiliary switches. I wanted to make sure that the head unit was easily accessible while driving, mounted in a clean line of sight where I didn't have to take my eyes off the road. Therefore, I wanted to mount it up near the top of the dash. Last year I installed a Ram dash mount. It's a bar that fits across the top of the dash. You can have Ram arms coming off of that. I utilized about a 2-inch, 3-inch Ram arm and mounted it there. I also had to order a Ram mount that would fit into the head unit. These head units use a 5mm bolt, which is very uncommon. I had to order a Ram adapter that has their type B Ram ball, and then screws into the back of the head unit. And it's a device that I've seen advertised for about $25 in the US. To get it here in Canada, it was 3 times that price, the most expensive single part of this install. Now that I've got it in place though, it's nice and clean, it's up visible, and it's very securely mounted. Here is the finished installation of the head unit. You can see it's mounted up on the dash on the Ram arm. It's nice and visible, but it's below line of sight. I wanted to mount the microphone on the dash. I wanted it to be easily accessible, and I found the magnetic mic. The magnetic mic has a small device that you screw to the dash. It's got a very powerful magnet in it. You add a metal cover over the tab on the back of the microphone. It allows it to stick there. Very nicely done. Here you can see where I've got the magnetic mic mounted on the dash. That's nice and handy. All in all, the installation took the better part of a weekend, about 2 days. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I had panels pulled off, I had the stock radio pulled out, the HVAC, the window switch controls pulled out of the dash to allow me to fish wires back and forth. I also had the kick panel pulled off on the passenger side to get access to the auxiliary wiring. I had the seat pulled out, and I also wanted to drill a hole in the dash and route the control cable from the unit up to the head unit up through the dash directly. So that meant needing to drill a small hole in the very top of the dash. To best access that, I ended up flipping down the windshield. It's the first time I've done that. All in all, I'm very happy with the way things turned out. I got everything put back together when it was done. It looks professional, it works well. All in all, I'm very happy, and I'm beginning to learn many of the new cool features of this radio. Thank you for joining me. I hope this was useful to somebody. It was a fun project. Plan ahead, figure out what you're going to do, what components you're going to use, and get the good stuff. Take care.